The steaming cup of tea had barely touched the lonely single dad's hands when 4 identical little girls suddenly surrounded his table. Their tiny faces were pale with fear, their eyes constantly searching behind them as though someone dangerous might appear at any second. Then, without warning, all 4 leaned closer and whispered the same unbelievable sentence that would change his life forever. "Please, pretend you're our father." In that single moment, an ordinary afternoon became the beginning of a story that would test courage, kindness, and the meaning of family in ways no one could have imagined. Before we continue, if you believe that one act of kindness can change a life, that second chances deserve to be given, and that family is built with love rather than blood, please like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone you care about, and subscribe to SoulTales for more heart-touching stories that remind us humanity still exists. Daniel Harper had never expected life to become so quiet. At only 36 years old, he had already buried his wife after a long battle with illness and had spent every waking hour raising his 8-year-old son Ethan alone. Every dollar Daniel earned came from repairing electrical systems in old apartment buildings across the city. The work was exhausting, the pay barely covered rent, and every evening he returned home carrying sore muscles and silent worries. Yet he never complained because Ethan still smiled every morning before school, and that smile reminded Daniel that giving up was never an option. On weekends Daniel rewarded himself with one simple tradition. He would stop by a tiny roadside tea cafe before heading home. The owner knew his order without asking, and the warm cup of tea became the only peaceful moment in his busy life. That Saturday seemed no different. Rain clouds covered the sky while people hurried past carrying umbrellas. Daniel quietly watched the traffic, thinking about overdue bills and Ethan's upcoming birthday, wondering how he could afford the bicycle his son had dreamed about for months. Without warning, 4 little girls, each around 6 years old, appeared beside his table. They wore expensive matching dresses, but their polished appearance could not hide the terror written across their innocent faces. They looked exactly alike, making it nearly impossible to tell them apart. One of them gently grabbed Daniel's sleeve while another kept looking toward the entrance of the cafe. Together, almost in perfect harmony, they whispered that impossible request. They begged him to pretend to be their father for just a few minutes because someone was following them. Daniel's heart pounded. Every instinct told him something serious was happening. Before he could even think of refusing, he noticed 2 suspicious men scanning every table outside the cafe. Their expressions were cold, and they seemed determined to find someone. Daniel immediately understood that the frightened children had not invented their fear. He calmly invited the girls to sit beside him, placing himself between them and the strangers. When the men glanced toward the table, Daniel smiled naturally and gently placed one protective hand around the nearest child as though they truly belonged together. The strangers hesitated. They exchanged uncertain looks before eventually walking away into the crowded street. Only then did the girls begin breathing normally again. Tears rolled down one little face as she confessed they had become separated from their security team after slipping away to buy ice cream. They had recognized the strange men following them for several blocks and remembered their mother's warning never to trust anyone except people who looked genuinely kind. Somehow they had chosen Daniel. Within minutes, dozens of security vehicles surrounded the cafe. Professional bodyguards rushed inside while a tall woman wearing a dark business suit stepped out of a luxury car with panic written across her face. Isabella Morgan, one of the country's youngest and most respected CEOs, had spent the last hour believing her daughters had been kidnapped. The moment she saw the girls running safely toward her, relief overwhelmed every emotion she had been holding back. The quadruplets threw themselves into Isabella's arms before excitedly pointing toward Daniel. Their tiny voices explained how the lonely man drinking tea had protected them without asking for anything in return. Isabella approached Daniel expecting to thank him politely, but instead she found herself staring at a man whose tired eyes reflected honesty, humility, and quiet strength. He accepted her gratitude with embarrassment, insisting he had only done what any decent parent would have done. Isabella offered a generous financial reward, but Daniel respectfully declined. He explained that helping frightened children should never carry a price. Those simple words surprised everyone present, especially Isabella, who had spent years surrounded by people motivated by wealth and influence. She watched Daniel quietly leave with his worn backpack, unaware that her daughters were already begging to see him again. The following week an elegant invitation arrived at Daniel's apartment. Isabella requested that he and Ethan join her family for dinner. Daniel almost refused, believing they lived in completely different worlds, but Ethan encouraged him to accept. The boy had never visited a mansion before, and Daniel hoped one pleasant evening might create a happy memory for his son. When they arrived, the enormous estate seemed like another universe. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers while beautiful gardens stretched beyond every window. Yet the greatest surprise came when the quadruplets raced toward Daniel and Ethan as though greeting lifelong family members. Their laughter filled the mansion with warmth that expensive decorations had never managed to create. Over dinner Isabella quietly shared pieces of her life rarely revealed to anyone. Her husband had disappeared years earlier during an international business investigation and was officially presumed dead, though no evidence had ever been found. Since then she had devoted herself entirely to raising her daughters while managing a global company. Success had brought wealth but stolen nearly every peaceful moment of motherhood. Her daughters had grown up surrounded by employees, bodyguards, and schedules instead of ordinary family experiences. As weeks passed, Daniel and Ethan became unexpected visitors at the Morgan estate. The girls adored Ethan like an older brother, while Daniel naturally treated the children with patience, discipline, and affection. He taught them how to ride bicycles in the park, helped them build birdhouses, and showed them that happiness could exist without expensive toys or luxury vacations. Isabella often watched from a distance, realizing her daughters smiled differently around Daniel. Their joy looked effortless instead of rehearsed. At the same time Daniel struggled with his own doubts. He constantly reminded himself that he belonged to a modest apartment while Isabella lived among billion-dollar decisions. Rumors began spreading online after photographers captured the families together. Some accused Daniel of chasing wealth while others questioned Isabella's judgment. The criticism hurt deeply, and Daniel considered disappearing from their lives entirely to protect everyone involved. Everything changed again when investigators finally identified the two suspicious men from the cafe. They had been hired by criminals hoping to pressure Isabella into signing fraudulent contracts worth millions. The girls had unknowingly become targets. Daniel's quick decision at the cafe had likely prevented a kidnapping that could have destroyed countless lives. Isabella finally understood the full weight of what Daniel had done that rainy afternoon. One evening Isabella visited Daniel's apartment instead of inviting him to the mansion. She saw the tiny kitchen, Ethan's carefully repaired school desk, and the family photographs that covered the walls. Nothing about the home was luxurious, yet every corner reflected love, sacrifice, and hope. She realized wealth could purchase comfort but never the atmosphere Daniel had created for his son. Months later Isabella made an unexpected decision. Rather than offering Daniel money or gifts, she established a community foundation supporting widowed and single parents struggling to raise children alone. She invited Daniel to lead its outreach programs because she believed genuine compassion could never be taught in business schools. Daniel accepted, finally discovering work that gave purpose beyond earning a paycheck. The foundation transformed hundreds of lives. Families received food, educational support, counseling, and employment opportunities. Daniel's story inspired volunteers across the city, while Ethan became a role model for children learning that difficult beginnings never define their future. The quadruplets proudly introduced Daniel everywhere as the man who had protected them when they needed a father most, even if only for a few minutes. Over time Isabella and Daniel's friendship quietly blossomed into something deeper. It grew not from grand romantic gestures but from countless ordinary moments, sharing meals, celebrating birthdays, helping children with homework, and standing beside each other during life's hardest days. Their families blended naturally, proving that love often begins with simple acts of courage performed without expecting anything in return. Before we reach the ending, please leave a comment with these words: kindness creates family. Your comment may encourage someone who is struggling today to believe that hope still exists. Years after that rainy afternoon, Daniel often returned to the same little tea cafe where everything had started. This time he was never alone. Ethan sat beside him while the quadruplets laughed around the table, and Isabella smiled as she watched the family fate had unexpectedly written for them. The lonely cup of tea that once symbolized grief had become a reminder that the smallest moments can carry the greatest miracles. A frightened whisper from 4 little girls had given 6 people something they had all been missing in different ways: a place to belong. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that compassion can change lives forever, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in hope, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to SoulTales. Your support allows more inspiring stories like this to reach people who may need a little light in their lives today. Because sometimes the family we are meant to have arrives in the most unexpected way, and one simple act of kindness becomes the beginning of a lifetime of love.